All right. Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing this morning? Awesome. That's great. Good to see a good crowd here this morning. First of all, I should tell you, I'm a little bit disappointed. And I'll tell you why. I was told that I was going to have a fireside chat, right? And when I come on the stage, I look at there is no fire.
You got a lighter? I mean,
there's nothing. Yeah. What do we do, Tom? Like, are we just going to just have a conversation, having these two chairs and talk about it and have a good conversation? So I know I've been given 15 minutes. That is a very, very long time, right? But I think we're going to make it a great conversation. Definitely audience participation is encouraged. And Tom is here today, so looking forward to speak to him and learn more about what's going on the fintech side of the world. Welcome, Tom. How are you doing?
Just great. Wow, these lights are...
I know, they're just
that's
like...
almost a fire.
Can you see me?
Yes, I
can.
can.
Okay,
absolutely.
Awesome. That's
yeah.
great. That's wonderful. So, Tom, I know you and I met probably 4 minutes ago, right?
Deep personal relationship.
And we have a deep personal relationship. We have met each other on LinkedIn, exchanged a couple emails, but this is the first time I get to know you, right? So that's great. You know, I love such kind of exchanges. So let's start with some simple questions for you, right? I have an easy job. I go to ask you questions, and you have to answer most of the time in the next 15 minutes, right? So tell us a little bit about what are some key initiatives that are going on at Commerce Signals?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at, and this kind of goes to the big picture of data, I mean, data is a core of bank profitability, right? Both on the risk side and being able to manage risk, but also on the acquiring side. We've got, I would say banks are the original data business, right? And particularly managing identity, trust, risk, and how to acquire. You think about financial companies like Capital One, with Nigel Morris and team really innovating on how do I bring data to market and more of from a marketing focus perspective. But banks are under attack. From the previous panel, I heard that bank margins are going down, not just in payments, but in core banking. And they've got to seek a way to play in areas beyond banking and as well as protect the profitability of it. So with Commerce Signals, you know, one of the challenges, you know, so I came out of both the banking world, so I'm one of most of just a show of hands, how many would say they're in a bank or a bank services company? Yeah, so I was part of that crowd, and I also spent time with Google and PayPal and Amazon as clients and helping them with strategy of looking of how can banks play outside of core banking, and the issues usually surround privacy and data security, and particularly cybersecurity is another core issue. And you know, data is kind of unique in that the value of data is based on use. Banks have known for years that the fact that I just buy an airline ticket within 23 minutes, I'm usually buying a hotel room. But what do you do with that piece of data? It's enormously powerful, and the value of it's based on usage. Sheridan might buy that piece of data for $20, but it's worth a nickel to McDonald's. It's the same piece of data, and it also decays quickly with time. So Commerce Signals is about helping banks use data in a very privacy-centric model. So the easy places to start are not as much around the consumer side, because the rule of thumb is that merchant-level data need merchant permissions, consumer-level data need consumer permissions, and getting consumer permissions is very, very hard. And so first data products we come out with our partners like Bank of America Merchant Services and Visa and others are around aggregate insight that banks can provide enormous value. One of our merchants is Target, and the fact that we measure their digital marketing effectiveness, for example. So they take the million consumers that heard an ad on Target on Spotify, and what was the spend of that group of a million, not Cam or Tom's spend, but that group, before they heard the ad and they after heard the ad, and you can see the ad effectiveness. Well, it sounds like an obvious thing to do, but they don't have that data. And at Google, we call that closing the loop. By getting that data in 1 or 2 days, I can stop doing ads that don't work and do more that do. Target spends $1 billion a year on marketing. If you can double marketing effectiveness, that's a big number. And it's an example of an area banks have that data. How do they let it play?
Gotcha. Cool. I think that's great. I know that's it's always interesting to see some of the next trends in the banking that are happening, and how there is a bridge of what's going on the Silicon Valley side of the world versus what's happening in banking, and there is always a bridge that can be established between those.
And I'm thrilled for being Charlotte. I mean, Charlotte is a great untapped market for talent. I mean, we're second largest financial center in the United States. It's a great place for engineers, great place for product managers and analysts. I'm thrilled to have the business based here.
That's great. So that leads into my next kind of question. In the top 10 retail banking's trends for 2018, the highest prediction of the industry was to remove the friction from customer journey. That was 61% as per the poll. And the next two mentioned were basically use of data and advanced analytics and refinements in multi-channel delivery. So my question to you is, Tom, you've had great experience in banking. How do you actually remove the friction from customer journey without compromising on data privacy?
It's a great question. So I think I'll give examples in the market. So the two leading financial companies in use of data, from my perspective, are MasterCard, which has about a $600 million data business. They just bought Applied Predictive Technologies last year for about $600 million. And in an example of how MasterCard works in data, at a merchant level, they work with Denny's. So Denny's pays them about $1 million a year. They get all of the SKU level information, all of the location information. They mix it with survey data, and they can help Denny's with menu item profitability for store operations efficiency, with where to build the next store. And it looks a lot more like a partnership with a business than it does on, and in that, they're helping the merchants improve the consumer journey. An example, American Express, just an unbelievable tech team. I think they're challenged in that their data is very focused in the travel and entertainment, particularly in the business travel side. So where it plays is narrow, but it's a very, very large market and a great team. They've developed systems so that if you are an Amex customer and you log on to Nordstrom's, they are giving your propensity in 100 different categories of Asian food, Asian travel, hiking, skiing, tennis, just from their own internal data. And in that, they can customize the landing page, based on your affinity or the propensity to buy in certain categories. All banks have the ability to do that, but the challenge in working with banking is that where banks always win in data is through a common network, where millions of consumers and millions of businesses can access them consistently in consistent rules. It's really hard to work with an individual bank. I think just one more example, customer journey, I'd say in banks, a bank that's, in my view, of the furthest ahead on the tech side is Capital One. I mean, they've got 150 agile teams. They're doing a lot of collaboration. So if you've got a Cap One card, an Uber today, that you would see, buy 9 rides, get 1 free. It's an integrated bar graph into the Uber application. It's a great example of what kind of collaboration is possible, but it's really hard for a bank to work with 1,000 different companies, and it's very, very hard for one company to work with 20 different banks.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. There are times when you do something on any of the social media sites too, I get a lot of offers from the banking, like even though I've done some transactions, etc. And it's interesting to see how these different partnerships are being leveraged in a big way. So thank you for sharing that. So Tom, this is an interesting thing. I don't know if you saw a couple of weeks ago at Google I/O, which happened in May. Google CEO Sundar Pichai, he gave a demo of the Google Duplex, right? And the idea was there's a Google Smart Assistant who's actually making call on behalf of the consumers and making some kind of an appointment, right? Do you see a future where a Google Assistant makes a call on behalf of a bank and asking for an auto loan to a customer? Do you see something like that?
No, I mean, so I was in Google in 2011 and ran strategy and M&A for Google Commerce, and back where there was Google Wallet before. I think, it's easy for banks to view Google as a threat. They touch your consumer, quite a bit more often than the banks touch the consumer. Their data is a much better quality, and predictive on consumer intent. You search on the word flu, they know you're probably sick, right?
Yep.
And I think for Google's role is they want to be an orchestrator of commerce. Their arch enemy is Amazon. I mean, 70% of product searches begin at Amazon. They want that back. And how are they doing that? They say, listen, all the local stores, let's upload your local inventory for Crate and Barrel and Macy's, as well as the local stores that are in your community. And when you search on men's wool slacks or a wicker chair, it says in stock at your local store. They'll come and pick it up for you and ship it to your house for twice a day for free. So they've lost money on payments. They've lost money on shipping. They're completely covering that. What they made it up for is taking 20% of the sale in advertising, right? So in this, and a view on financial services, they're looking to decrease friction in payments or in commerce, and whether that's needing funding to pay, but they do want to let the consumer pay the way they want to pay. That's the biggest thing for banks to know, is that they're not looking to introduce a competitor, but where banks put up friction. I mean, I can tell you, I am still frustrated with Chase, who's a constant focus of my blog ire. They're so difficult. They throw sand in the gears. That's not, the innovation is not control, and it's about how do I add value. As a bank, you've got to be where your customers are, not where you want them to be. And banks collectively spent $1.5 billion on card-linked offers to have learned some big lessons. That banks are a great place for consumer action but I mean, I ran online banking at Citi and Wachovia. I know consumers come in, check their balance, pay their bills, and leave. They don't have time to shop for dog food or restaurants, or that's not the majority. So how do banks play a supportive, collaborative role in what you line? And to your question on Google, I don't see Google doing that. I do see them being a front end to help make the customer journey easier. They are the consumer advocate, and that presents the risk for banks, because it does become a price competition if you don't have anything differentiated.
I agree. I think that those are great thoughts. So I know we are at the fintech generations, and we have been talking about open banking APIs, data science, data analytics, right? So from your viewpoint, how does the bank of future look like, right? And how do you monetize beyond the traditional channels, right? We just heard in the panel before around, there are a lot of open banking API initiatives that are going on, a lot of partnerships to leverage. But if I'm a millennial, right, what does a bank mean to me going forward?
That's a great question. I think we've got a few different scenarios. On the the worst scenario for banks is that we are commoditized infrastructure that is completely undifferentiated, and that's dumb pipes, right? We are, and I think there's a threat from open banking to being that the banks only own the dross and the regulatory burden for compliance on that, and startups get to put all the sexy wrapping stuff that the banks would love to do. I think what gets us out of that scenario is delivering value-added services to consumers and making part of some great customer experiences, which was your first proposition. But being part of customer experiences, it's very hard for bank IT teams, because it's not, collaboration is not wired into bank DNA. I mean, my mobile head at Citi, he was compensated by getting this Citi Offers app in the mobile, done. It's not about what is success and what are the metrics behind innovation. Success should be measured by the customer use and volume and change of behavior. And banks are not well suited to do that, so they've got a partner. Chase's approach, which I'll throw them under the bus a little bit, is to try to control everything and make everybody come to them. I mean, even until 2 years ago, Chase refused to put their card in the Google Wallet. We at Google, we said, that's fine, we'll just put a message out and say, contact Chase, they don't want to let you pay this way. Well, we don't want that. But, I think Bank of America and Ally have done a great job of being where their customers are, right? And I think that's where banks have looking what partners can help you build sustainable value propositions in lending, in retail, in commerce and payments. I'd say retailers want private label cards because it's a quasi-loyalty program. what can banks do? Banks want bank loyalty. I mean, are you really working at the merchant's best interest by pushing your card and your loyalty scheme over theirs?
Sure.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. So this is more just switching gears, right? And I want to know, could you highlight some unicorns in the data space that you would personally invest in?
Well, Google is still holding. I think it's a little late to be a unicorn. I think if we look at things like fintech, I think it's SoFi, of looking at student loans. I mean, you wouldn't naturally think that was, an area of focus. So I'm kind of light on fintech because of the regulatory burdens being placed on them relative to their growth potential. If banks really decided to focus in an area where there's a fintech niche, I think they could conquer that very quickly. That's where I'm negative. But if you look at, I mean, probably the topic of the day is this week of Adyen. I mean, their IPO was either yesterday or today. You look at the birth of Stripe and Adyen and PayPal and Square. All of those are spaces that banks could have owned. And I'm much more hot in those areas. I think if you're looking for me to drop specific company names, probably not going to do that. But I'd say the areas where I'm most interested in is our payments, particularly e-commerce, and combining banks with data and core services. And I think Adyen-like products. Banks have a lot of legacy infrastructure that makes them very hard for them to react with speed. And I think if you agree with my vision of they've got to collaborate more, they can't do that all organically. And I think that's where they're going to need a lot of startups and to help them get started in a space, get traction, and then see if they can bring it internally or move. I'd say networks are definitely an area of focus. Every bank success in commerce has been around a network, whether that's Visa, MasterCard, or SWIFT, or early warning, or it's how do banks act in collaboration.
Cool. Thank you, Tom. We have about 3 minutes left, and I would actually like the audience to participate if you have any questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and we'll get the microphone to you.
That was easy.
That was easy. Maybe then I should continue with my questions. Anybody in the audience? No? All right. Okay. So Tom, you get another question to answer, right? So what are the 3 top challenges that the CIO should prepare for in 2019?
Well, I think there's both an offensive and a defensive strategy that banks have to consider. Defensive is that banks' data is playing in market today. And I think that presents a fundamental risk. When you look at data, you've got to look at, do I have the rights to use the data, or have the data? Do I have the rights to use the data? Do I have the rights to share the data? And I think we're pretty locked down on a fraud and risk side of how data gets shared. It's the data is leaking out substantially on the payment side, primarily through bank marketing groups and directly from the merchants. I mean, there's a big merchant in New York that's on 34th Street and has a parade that is sending all of their transaction data to Google real time every day. So when you buy some wool slacks there, that SKU level information is going into Google. That's in the end. Somebody used a Visa or MasterCard to do that. They found a way to map it, and that's a risk to banks. Your customer is going to be. I used my bank card to make this happen. I think that's a challenge. I think so. On the other side, on a defensive strategy, Jamie Dimon and Wells' former CEO were all over things like Yodlee and how do we let aggregated data go out and pulling that data back in. And on for the offensive side of data to monetization, it's how do I make data play in a way that I can control its use? Not only dissemination, not only do I need to know who's going to use it, but how it's going to be used. And I think the long pole in a tent for any kind of collaboration with banks is around legal and privacy. And if you can't define the use, you can't get the approval to make that all happen. I think cybersecurity, you can't mention data without the organization of criminal rings and governments in attacking banks has never been greater. And it's that when you work with your own CIO, you've got to remember that's what they're thinking about. I was at a fraud startup, not committing it, but trying to help banks protect it. And that was my joke but in this, you see like the Russian business network go and hit banks to confirm credentials and only hit them one time so that they could go into a 0-day attack and hit all of them through all their areas of compromise all at once. So overwhelm the bank's defenses. So banks have to play a good defense, but there's lots of opportunity for a good offense too.
Awesome. That's great. That's perfect. Actually, we are running out of time, but I wish, so Tom, thank you for your time. I really enjoyed the exchange. I wish we got 45 minutes like the other panel, but I look forward to learn more from you in the future.
Thanks, Cam.
Thank you. Thank you.